Well, graphic testimony lately in the trial of Casey Anthony, all about her little girl's body, which was found 6 months after she was last seen. We're going to bring in our legal guys, Avery Friedman, a civil rights attorney and law professor. He's in Cleveland. Richard Herman, a New York criminal defense attorney and law professor. He joins us from Las Vegas. First of all, boy, I was watching this trial. I am riveted by this trial. Day 16, we heard the forensics, how they found the girl. Avery, how does that affect the jury, the graphic testimony?
Well, this is the most dramatic part of the trial, Deb. It is the crescendo that the prosecution is building to achieve their obligation of proving their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And they've done it carefully, methodically. They've done it smart. But again, the skull, the idea of testimony, even the part about drawing the body into the woods where bones were gnawed by animals, obviously is having an effect. Question, prejudicial versus probative. Probative prevails. It's an appropriate way of prosecuting the case.
You know, and Richard, one thing I don't understand, they've spent a lot of time about the garbage that was in the trunk of her case, of Casey's car. First of all, what kind of mother drives around with garbage in her car? It's not even logical. Yeah. They find traces of chloroform on it. Why do you think they're spending so much time on this?
Well, one of the keys to the prosecution's case is that Casey put the child, after she was dead, in the trunk and drove around with her about 4 or 5 days, deciding what to do with the body. So they're trying to show forensically that, you know, that body was in that car, that was Casey's car, so therefore she had to have killed the child and drove her around in her car. Problem is, they can't link Casey to driving the car around with the baby. They cannot link it, Deb. The prosecution has a lot of problems. They went overkill on this forensic crime scene photos. I mean, of course they're admissible in every case, but they went overboard. And that overlay video that they played in court yesterday, that's absolutely going to be grounds for reversible error in this case. It was horrible to do that. And with a week to go, Deb, the government, they just haven't done it. They just haven't done it in a first-degree murder case.
Avery, you're saying that that's probative, that it is not prejudicial necessarily, which is interesting. But do you think the defense has been able to undermine the testimony put forth by prosecution that, in fact, George Anthony, the father, was the one responsible for Casey's death? Has that really stuck as far as the cross-examination?
Well, Jose Baez, in the history, in the annals of American criminal law, you got to take that opening statement and put it at the bottom. And that, unfortunately, has set the tone here. To answer the question, Deb, I don't think much, if not all, of the prosecution's evidence has been undermined in the least. Again, we're going to hear the defense coming up in about a week, but the fact is that the evidence has essentially been irrefutable. The defense really has not done much of anything to bias the jury in thinking that maybe there's some justification. I think the defense is in a world of trouble. That's not a surprise to anyone.
And before we segue to the next story, I want to say, does she have to testify? Avery, yes or no?
Yes.
Richard, yes or no?
If she testifies, she's going to get convicted and get sentenced to death.
Okay, a lot of lies in that case. It's going to be interesting. We're going to have to see. That is the wild card, so we're going to have to see. Now, we're going to turn to another story, the Red Bull defense. This energy drink, basically, any energy drinks, really. Stephen Coffin was arrested back in December 2009 for smothering his 83-year-old father to death. He claims that he was so exhausted, was so deprived of sleep, that when he drank the energy drink, it basically resulted in temporary insanity. Richard, is this simply creativity at work here?
Deb, 5 doctors examined him. 5 doctors made the same finding. The government agreed with the doctors. They presented a plea deal to the judge, and the judge accepted it.
Do you think, Avery, do you think that, in fact, it's fair for somebody who is admitted to killing his dad that a mental institution is the right place for somebody like that to be?
It's exactly where it belongs. Bottom line, Red Bull defense didn't work. Twinkie didn't work 10 years ago. Judge did the right thing based upon overwhelming evidence of incapacity to have the intent to murder.
Which is fascinating because it means that he did not know what he was doing when he drank this drink and that it was some sort of surge of energy. Do you think we're going to see this kind of defense cropping up all over the place, Richard?
Anything that can enhance or hamper the mental abilities of someone at the time of a crime, that's going to be used here. Look, the 5 doctors supported it, Deb. 5. Pretty powerful. It did go. The temporary insanity was acceptable in this case, approved by the court. The one going insane is his brother, because there's about $400,000 inheritance that's going to be divided between the two, and he was hoping to get the whole thing.
Yeah,
but,
and the brother basically said he was crazy enough to get away with murder. But okay, we're going to be checking in with you in just a few moments, guys, so don't go away. You're both going to be back in about 10 minutes. We're going to be talking about an actor in trouble, Wesley Snipes. He still is trying to get out of prison, and this time he's appealed to the Supreme Court. Jurors in the retrial of Rod Blagojevich have the weekend off. They began deliberating yesterday after 6 weeks of testimony. The former Illinois governor faces 20 counts in all, and he's accused of trying to sell President Obama's U.S. Senate seat. Jurors in his first trial deadlocked on all but one count. And days after former presidential candidate John Edwards was indicted by a federal grand jury on charges that he violated campaign finance laws, his lawyers have asked a judge to delay his deposition in a civil suit. It involves a video purportedly showing him with his then mistress, Riel Hunter. In a court filing obtained by our affiliate WTVD, Edwards says answering questions under oath would violate his Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate himself. Well, now to Wesley Snipes, serving time for tax evasion. He keeps appealing, but he is still behind bars. Our legal guys are back. Avery Friedman in Cleveland and Richard Herman in Las Vegas. First, we're going to look at Wesley Snipes. Well, Monday, the U.S. Supreme Court said it would not hear the actor's latest appeal. Richard, was it a strong case he made as to why he should be given a new appeal, a new trial?
Well, he said he couldn't get a fair trial in Ocala, Florida, because that's the hotbed of Klan activity, and he's not a resident of Florida, except that his driver's license is a Florida license, and he's brought litigations in Florida naming Florida as his residence. So it was a stupid, ridiculous appeal, and it was, not such a hot defense. Although at trial, Deb, you'll remember, he got acquitted of the felony charges, only got convicted of the misdemeanor charges, and the judge slammed him with a very harsh prison sentence here. But we're talking $40 million for which he failed to file tax returns and failed to pay taxes on. Subsequently, he did pay the tax money, but the judge hammered him anyway.
So, Avery, Wesley Snipes, he can fight vampires, but when he goes up against the IRS, he's just not going to win. Do you really think that should Wesley Snipes just let this go? Is he done?
Well, the judge said, Wesley, give it up, brother. You're not going anywhere with this. But, Deb, if you go to prison, you're going to fight hard. To any last bit, you're going to fight. And that's what he did. But really
it could be the plot of his next movie. Well, let's move on a little bit. Next topic, very important. Indiana Planned Parenthood. Tuesday, a new law took effect in Indiana. It's going to keep Medicaid funds from groups like Planned Parenthood, not because of all the services they offer, but just because they offer abortions. This seems fundamentally unfair, especially since Planned Parenthood is on record saying we don't use state or federal money for those abortions. Do you think this is right?
It is clearly unconstitutional. Same law was held unconstitutional in Texas, Missouri. There was a temporary restraining order denied. Ultimately, it will be held unconstitutional. The new abortion law in Indiana, which takes effect on July 1st, Deb, will also be held unconstitutional. It's heading to the U.S. Supreme Court.
I mean, Avery, do you see this as really, why are they going after Planned Parenthood when, in fact, there are clinics that offer it, there are hospitals that offer it? This seems almost like a personal vendetta against this organization. Avery?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I mean, Planned Parenthood has been a strong advocate of women's rights and reproductive rights. That's where the focus has been. 9,300 women in Indiana will be adversely affected by this law. But again, ultimately, Deb, it's going to be held unconstitutional. It's a right that women have, and they've had it since 1970.
And Richard, do you see it going all the way to the Supreme Court as well? Do you see this as going to the mats?
Yeah, it probably will, Deb. You know, Medicaid funding is comprised of state funds and federal funds. And what the federal government has said is that if the state withholds their funds, the feds will. That's $40 billion in revenue, federal funding every year lost by the state. They're just not targeting Planned Parenthood. They're targeting any institution that provides abortions.
And obviously the problem there is that it affects women's health in general because it's going to go after the institutions that are providing it, certainly to the poor and the uninsured. Well, Richard Herman, Avery Friedman, thanks so much as always for joining us.